So what do you do when that war game is dead on arrival, DOA? That's what we're going to explore in this vlog and raise the question, because I'm going to share a system that I really enjoy. I am very passionate about, but from the perspective of how it rolled out, how it's supported, it's unfortunately DOA. And is that necessarily a bad thing? So there's this idea in buying into a wargaming system, you're buying into a couple of things. You're buying into a game that is going to be supported by the manufacturer, by the company, and you're buying into a game that has the potential for community or is already established as a community. Now, two examples we're going to look at that is Warhammer 40,000, Games Workshop, been around for a long time. You buy into the 40K hobby, there is a massive community, online, offline, locally, gaming stores, events that you know, hey, I'm going to put a lot of time and effort into this game and I'm going to be able to share it and explore it with friends pretty easy. It's been around for a while. On the opposite side, just as a great example, X-Wing miniatures. When X-Wing miniatures first dropped and deployed, there was no community, but you knew, hey, this is X-Wing. This is Star Wars. There's going to be a community overnight, and it's amazing to see with X-Wing Classic, X-Wing 1.0, to see how that evolved, how quickly it went from nobody playing it to within a year rivaling Warhammer 40,000, 40K, but it's Star Wars. But you buy into a game, you want to try to see, is there an existing community, or if it's so new, then is there a plan for that community to roll out from the manufacturer, from the game developer, or just depending on the type of game that it is this something that's going to be regularly picked up? Because otherwise, it's going to launch, you're going to potentially buy in, and it's going to be DOA. So let's look at Judge Dredd. Judge Dredd, the miniature game, I love the game. It's a kind of a skirmish warband type game. I loved the comics from back in the day. I used to collect Judge Dredd and Punisher, and every Friday go into the comic store and have my pulls ready to go and just reading it and loving it. So for me, playing Judge Dredd miniatures is a chance just to relive those memories. And it's the type of game, when I bought into it, I knew it wasn't going to be mainstream. Because first of all, it's a skirmish-based game. There's not a lot of money to be made in it from the point of view of a games developer, because it's not like 40K where I'm selling you more and more every single month. You could pick up all of the factions, which I had. Then where do you kind of go from there? And likewise, it's Judge Dredd. There's a lot of Dredd enthusiasts out there. But compared to other systems, other sci-fi hobbies, who's really going to buy into it unless you're a Judge Dredd fan? But I bought into it knowing, hey, this was just something that I wanted to build, I wanted to paint, I wanted to collect, that once or twice a year I get some friends and we kind of play and have some fun. And there are some scenarios in the Cursed Lands where you fight zombie hordes and it's kind of an AI, and a couple of times solo, I'll play with that. But I knew jumping in what I was getting involved with. But then we look at some other type of gaming systems that, when they're released, it is a somewhat small target audience, but so much depends on the release rollout and can it be done correctly. And this example that I'm going to illustrate, it's a system that I bought into. It's a system that I play. It's a system that I hope continues to be supported, but it got hit midstream with the pandemic. And the question is it on life support? Pacific Rim Extinction. Jaegers, kaiju, giant robots, fighting giant monsters, a light rule set that is fast to play, very tactical. That alone brought me in. What also really impressed me, so the narrative, the sci-fi narrative brought me in because I'm a massive Pacific Rim fan. But what also brought me in was that the producer looked at this and said, we're going to do something different. We're going to have a fun, solid rule set, which it is, but we're going to produce painted miniatures in heroic scale. So we're going to have the kaiju and we're going to have the Jaegers fully painted big scale. And the paint on them for mass-produced, mass-painted miniatures, popping them out, they look fantastic. I mean, previously, X-Wing miniatures, Wings of Glory, they were the only pre-paints, but they were kind of a smaller scale. These are big, big miniatures. They look epic on the table. So that was very ambitious. And buying into that, I was like, this is ready to go. This is ready to play. But I knew it's a small target audience. And the Kickstarter, the release, certainly there were enough Jaegers and there were enough Kaiju released. They're doing all of them from the movies, even if they just showed up for 2 minutes. So there is a tremendous, tremendous variety of miniatures, which is good because it's going to keep it fresh. It's going to keep it out there with the combos and what you can explore. But the challenge here, of course, was why it's kind of DOA right now is this is a very, very focused sci-fi universe. How many fans are out there who would jump into Pacific Rim? Now, if you love the movies, you're in, kind of like Judge Dredd. If you enjoyed the movies and you enjoy the system and love the game designers, maybe you're in. But if you're out there in wargaming land and you're playing your system and you're like, I'm thinking about buying into something else, is this something that you would look at? So it's a very, very small target audience. But what really made it challenging was the release of it. They were going to do it in waves. Now, originally, and this happens with Kickstarters all the time, where you're launching that as almost a pre-order system as opposed to a traditional type launch, the thought was to release everything at once. Now, was that a little bit ambitious? Possibly. As it evolved, it was going to come out over 3 waves. But those 3 waves were going to be completely staggered. And sometimes if things are released in 3 waves, as opposed to dumping everything in retail, that's almost better for the game. I feel like that's almost better for the game because if I really like this system and I want to buy in, buying a starter set and buying like 30 other space monsters and robots, that's a lot of outlay. That's a lot of outlay, even if you have poor impulse control. But if you're like, all right, wave 1 is hitting, and I get the starter pack, and I get the 4 dudes, and then a couple of months later, wave 2 hits, and maybe I pick up half of that, and a couple of months finish that out. Then when I finish that out, wave 3. So it keeps that enthusiasm going where you can look forward to new stuff while it builds up a community base. What happened because of the pandemic? Well, first of all, it was way over delayed. Kept on getting pushed back. Wave 1 arrived, and it really didn't have much bite. It had the starter set, and the choice of the Jaegers and Kaiju, they gave you 4. We could argue were some more popular than others. That's a matter of perspective, what you think looks sexy and cool, but extremely, extremely limited. And Wave 2 is supposed to follow up, but with supply chain and Kickstarter and the pandemic, it got kicked back forever. And literally what I saw was the Pacific Rim community jumping in enthusiastically, but you couldn't really pitch or support the game to those outside of the initial buy-in or the initial enthusiasts like myself, because someone would look and say, okay, I like the idea of it, and currently I don't have that type of play style in my gaming collection, and it looks like a lot of fun, but it's so limited. And how do you build a community on that? It's stalled out, and that community just trying to run regular play events, it's hard. And one of the ways to jumpstart a community, like that fire, make things a little bit competitive. Get them out there playing in a tournament or a campaign. In order to do that, you need a decent selection of units or a decent selection of armies. To have battles where it's 4 or 5 tables, 6 tables, 10 tables of the same 2 robots and space monsters, like that just gets kind of stale. So I literally noticed in the community, it died so fast. And not only my local meta here, not that there was a ton of us playing, but just being a member of some Facebook groups and some forums where now it's down to, we're getting Wave 2, in theory, releasing July-ish, and there's going to be 8 in total, 4 and 4. But at this point, it's only the real diehard players like myself that who knew was going to buy in. Now, that said, is that a problem? Is that a major deal? I bought into Wave 2. I've got the pre-orders up, and if Wave 3 ever happens, I'll purchase those, not only as a completionist with poor impulse control, but because there is something to be said if a game plays fast and fun, and it's pre-painted. There's kind of a lot on the checklist where this game plays fast, it's fun. What I've noticed is it's very noticeable. You set this up to play, even if people don't know Pacific Rim, they're like, hey, that's like some Godzilla type thing. You've got like giant robots fighting giant monsters. Like, that looks kind of cool. It's immediately understandable. And it's easy to pick up and play. When you have a system that suddenly is dead on arrival and suddenly is very limited, if you have that window, it becomes very easy to acquire the pieces that you need and have a complete collection. And it's my intention, of course, to play it with my friends like I do, and I enjoy playing it. But I see an example like Pacific Rim, a great club game. The type of game where I've got some 3D printed terrain, I've got a nice little wooden board with effects, and it's got sideboards with the Pacific Rim logo that you can put your con sheets and your kaiju sheets on there. And to set this up, because it's so easy to pick up and looks great and plays great, to just bring with me to the club and just set it up and play it. Or if somebody else wants to play it, go ahead and play it. I see it as a very, very fun game. So often what we see when games die or they're DOA, there's a life to them in that they become great filler games. I mean, the game isn't dead in that the pieces are out there. It's just not widely supported in the community. Another question would be, could it potentially be repurposed if it hits the mark? Looking at this, the Fantasy Flight Rune Wars game, where they took the kind of the battle lore idea from back in the day, created all these miniatures, plastic miniature kits that you had to build and you had to paint, a traditional war game. And I was initially very excited about this, a mass-scale fantasy game set in the Runebound universe, which I enjoy. Fantasy Flight did have a couple of things that were innovative about it, but it was so DOA in that the game released, and veterans that I knew that were interested in things was like, this game's never going to make it, because Fantasy Flight's entire audience, first of all, the majority of their audience are board gaming enthusiasts, and those that are miniature wargaming enthusiasts, they play X-Wing miniatures. Fantasy Flight is not equipped to support, in terms of the hobby and the community, this idea through website, through media, through tutorials to like build and paint your miniatures. You know, Games Workshop has been geared up for that for a long time. So what we saw was people were looking and saying, yeah, the rules, there's a couple of innovative things. There's a couple of things I liked, but nothing that was like, wow, this is revolutionary. And I don't mean that as a criticism. You just need a solid, fun rule set. I don't need to like reinvent something new, the genesis of something new. That's nice. Just give me something solid. It was. But it wasn't a strong enough IP. It wasn't like it was Star Wars or 40K. And to build and paint, and it wasn't an established line, so you didn't know where things are going. You know, X-Wing miniatures, yes, it was painted, but you knew at some point you were going to get, name whatever, Starfighter. Now this was early on, classic X-Wing, the Millennium Falcon. You knew it was going to be released. You knew at some point you were going to get a TIE Defender. You knew at some point you were going to get a TIE Interceptor. So if you're like, I love TIE Interceptors, then you knew, because the Star Wars universe and the IP is out there, at some point you were going to get that in one of the waves. The Fantasy Flight miniatures, like, we don't even know what we're looking forward to. So that game was so DOA, it was just, it was crazy how fast it died. I still had a lot of friends that picked it up as it was dying, because the thought process was, hey, some of the kits are very interesting. The price of them once they were reduced, once they were clearance, it was literally pennies on the dollar. And there were a number of players that I know that didn't go the route that I did looking at Pacific Rim, where it's like, hey, I want to play Pacific Rim. And I'm going to collect it, and I'm going to play it, and I'm going to have a great time. I'll pull in some friends. It'll be a nice little filler pickup game. There were people who picked up the Fantasy Flight miniatures, friends of mine, who were like, I'm going to kit bash these for my Tyranids. Another friend was like, I'm going to kit bash these for my Vampire Counts army. D&D players I know who were really into the Dwarven Forge and the various aspects from there were like, I'm going to pick these up because they look different to mix in, and there's some interesting kits, and like they're crazy cheap. So sometimes when a game is DOA, even if you don't want to just play it on your own or by yourself, there's massive value for other hobby aspects. And I think there's something to be said, possibly keeping an eye out to look for that. Of course, that window is very, 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 very short, very, very close, because once that stock is no longer being made and supported, and when the price gets low enough, gets slashed enough, there will be people that will pick that up for various reasons. And the irony being, it always sells out faster. It always sells out faster than when it was released in the first place. So out of curiosity, wargaming enthusiasts, do you have any systems that were DOA? Not systems like I play Mordheim 2 or 3 times a year. I've got my war bands. Friends come over. We set up a very nice table, pull out some of the D&D terrain, and we just have some fun. We've been doing it for like 12 or 13 years. I play Possessed, and I play Dwarven Treasure Hunters. That game it wasn't DOA. It's not supported anymore. Games Workshop just stopped it a number of years ago. But games that launched that maybe you were excited about, or games where you were like, I kind of like this, but I know it's just, for various reasons, not going to make it in the support. Do you have any games in your collection that were DOA? Did you find that out after the fact, or did you find that out going in and you're like, hey, I'm still cool with this because it's a great game, we're going to have a lot of fun? And being physical, being analog, nothing says just because a game isn't supported or a game's not around that you can't continue to enjoy it and play it.